February 7th, 1944. The Arakan Coast, Burma. The pre-dawn air is thick with the smell of damp earth, monsoon rot, and anticipation. Lieutenant General Tadashi Hanaya, commander of the Japanese 55th Division, studies the British perimeter through his field glasses. His objective is what the British have dubbed the admin box, a sprawling, chaotic administrative and supply dump for the 7th Indian Infantry Division, nestled in a scrubland basin. To Hanaya's seasoned eyes, it's not a fortress, it's a target, a fat, slow, and utterly complacent target. His plan, Ha-Go, is a masterstroke of aggressive tactics that has shattered British morale time and again. A deep, encircling flank march to cut the enemy's supply lines, followed by a relentless assault from all sides. Panic, confusion, and retreat will follow. It always does. Across the jungle, 5,000 of his infantry, the veterans of Singapore and Malaya, move like shadows. They have crossed impossible terrain, living on handfuls of rice to get behind the British. They now occupy the high ground, the Nyakiadak Pass. The British below are already cut off, trapped. Inside the box, the mood is one of grim determination, laced with fear. Brigadier Jeffrey Evans, commanding the 9th Brigade, knows the doctrine. When cut off, you withdraw. But this time, orders from the top, from Slim's 14th Army, are revolutionary, unthinkable. Stand fast, be supplied by air, fight. It is a direct challenge to the Japanese playbook. As the first Japanese probes begin, a ripple of mocking laughter spreads among the forward sniper positions. Through the morning haze, they spot movement near the British lines. Tanks? They squint. What they see are crude silhouettes mounted on jeeps, canvas stretched over frames, the pathetic, obvious shapes of dummy tanks. The reports filter back to Hanaya's officers. The British are resorting to children's toys. They are trying to scare us with carnival props. The Japanese confidence hardens into outright contempt. This would not be a battle, it would be a slaughter. The order is given. With the rising sun at their backs, the main assault begins, a screaming, bayonet-waving tide of men pouring down from the hills, certain of their enemy's weakness, certain of their inevitable victory. They have broken empires with this very charge. They close in on the perimeter wire, their war cries meant to freeze the defenders' blood. They are meters from the first slit trenches when a new sound cuts through the din. Not the crack of rifles, but a deep, guttural, mechanical roar from behind the British lines, a sound that shouldn't be there. From the very same sector where the flimsy canvas decoys sat, a shape grinds forward, parting the mist and the dust of battle. It is not canvas, it is 30 tons of cast steel. The long, unmistakable barrel of a 75mm main gun levels towards the onrushing tide. For a single suspended heartbeat, the leading Japanese infantrymen skid to a halt, their battle cries dying in their throats. Their eyes, wide with a dawning, horrific understanding, lock onto the green, angular monster now revealed before them. A real M3 Lee tank of the 25th Dragoons. The roar was not a single note, but a chorus. From the haze behind the first Lee, a second angular hull emerged, then a third. Not just the tall, boxy profiles of the Lees with their sponson-mounted 75s, but the lower, more aggressive silhouettes of Sherman tanks, the real mailed fist of the 25th Dragoons. The decoy jeeps, their purpose now brutally served, were unceremoniously shoved aside by steel tracks. Inside the lead Lee, Lieutenant John Jack Gorman, his face already streaked with oil and sweat in the furnace-like interior, barked into the intercom. "Gunner, HE, those infantry clusters, 300 yards, fire!" The massive gun recoiled with a deafening crump inside the hull, the blast kicking up a wall of earth and shattered bodies ahead. Machine guns from the cupolas and hulls began their deadly stutter, hosing down the stalled Japanese advance with 30 and 50 caliber fire. The tide that had flowed so confidently downhill now broke against an immovable, spitting wall of steel. The Japanese reaction was a study in desperate, ingrained discipline meeting an unprecedented shock. There were no anti-tank guns of significant caliber in this initial assault wave. They hadn't been deemed necessary. Junior officers, swords drawn, tried to rally men armed only with grenades, mines, and sublime courage. Small teams scrambled forward, not in a wave now, but in suicidal rushes. A lone soldier would sprint from a scrub bush, a Type 99 magnetic mine clutched in his hand, only to be cut down meters from the grinding tracks. The tanks did not fight alone. From the slit trenches, the British and Indian infantry, their morale surging at the sight, poured in a renewed, vicious volume of fire, pinning the supporting infantry. The battlefield soundscape transformed. The dominant noise was no longer the high-pitched screams of banzai, but the deeper mechanical thunder of tank engines, the specific whoomp of high-explosive shells, and the ripping cloth sound of heavy machine guns. The mist, now laced with acrid cordite and the finer, greasy smoke of burning grass, began to lift under the rising sun, revealing a tableau of utter reversal. From his command post, Brigadier Evans watched through his own glasses, a tight grin breaking his stern features. The order to stand fast was no longer theoretical. It was embodied in 30 tons of moving armor. For the first time in the Burma campaign, a surrounded British force was not retreating, it was counterattacking. The Dragoons' tanks, in coordination with infantry from the West Yorkshire Regiment, began a slow, methodical advance, not to break out, but to crush the encirclement itself, clearing the enemy from the vital airstrip and pushing them back into the hills. The airstrip was more than a strip of packed earth. It was the beating heart of the admin box, and the tanks had secured its pulse. But the battle was far from over. Hanaya's infantry, those veterans of impossible marches, now clung to the jungle-choked slopes of the Nyekyadak Pass with the tenacity of ticks. They had been blunted, not broken. From their hidden bunkers and spider holes, they commanded every approach with interlocking fields of machine gun and sniper fire. The dragoons' charge could not simply continue uphill into that murderous green gloom. The war of movement had collapsed back into a brutal, yard-by-yard war of attrition. This was where the air became the true lifeline. With the perimeter stable, the Dakota transports came in lower, bolder. They didn't just parachute supplies, they landed. On the scarred, cratered strip, under sporadic mortar fire, pilots like those of No. 194 Squadron RAF performed near miracles. A C-47 would shudder to a halt, its engine still screaming in reverse pitch, while Gurkha and Punjabi troops sprinted forward, not to disembark, but to unload. Within minutes, they stripped the fuselage of ammunition crates, medical supplies, and sacks of rice, then hauled out wounded men on stretchers, sliding them into the cavernous hold. The plane would then turn, engines roaring back to life, and lurch back into the sky, often as shells from the hills walked across the runway behind it. It was a clinic in courage and logistics, a defiant rebuke to the Japanese doctrine of encirclement. On the ground, the counterattack became a meticulous, grinding affair. The tanks, vulnerable in the close terrain, evolved into mobile pillboxes. A Lee or Sherman would nudge forward to a vantage point, its engine a constant low growl. Spotters, often an infantry officer with a radio or a tank commander with binoculars, would identify a flash from the hillside, a machine gun nest cleverly concealed behind a teak log, a sniper position in a treetop. Coordinates were relayed. The tank's gun would traverse with a hydraulic whine, pause, and then fire a single high-explosive round. The jungle would erupt in a crown of dirt, splintered wood, and silence. It was brutal, precise work. Yet the Japanese refused to yield their high ground. Night after night they tried to infiltrate to recapture the initiative they had lost at dawn on the 7th. Small, desperate groups would filter through the perimeter, aiming for the field hospital, the artillery parks, the command posts. The close-quarters fighting in the dark was medieval in its horror, a world of grenade blasts, bayonet thrusts, and the wet sound of the kukri. But the British and Indian troops, knowing relief was not coming overland but from the sky above them, held with a new kind of stubbornness. They were no longer a surrounded force waiting to be rescued. They were the anvil, and General Slim was preparing the hammer. The hammer fell from the west. As Hanaya's division remained locked in its bloody embrace with the admin box, the rest of the 5th and 7th Indian Divisions, following Slim's orders, did not retreat to save them. Instead, they turned and attacked towards the siege, fighting up the coastal road and the parallel trails. The Japanese 55th Division was now itself caught in a vice, Evans' defiant box to the east, and fresh, aggressive divisions driving into its rear from the west. The trap had been sprung, but on the trappers. Inside his humid command cave, Tadashi Hanaya received the reports of this new western pressure. The realization would have been cold, slow, and absolute. The Hago offensive had failed. The British had not panicked, they had not retreated, they had used his own aggression to fix his finest troops in place, while other forces maneuvered for a killing blow. The mockery he and his men had felt days before was now a phantom echo, replaced by a chilling certainty. They were no longer the hunters, they were the prey, and the jungle was closing in. The end was not a single cataclysm, but an unraveling. The pressure from the west, the relentless air supply to the box, and the sapping, daily attrition in the hills formed a triple vice from which Hanaya's 55th Division could not wriggle free. Their supply lines, those tenuous threads back to Burma proper, were now severed by the advancing Indian divisions. The hunters were starving. In the admin box, the nature of the struggle shifted perceptibly. The nightly infiltrations grew more desperate, less tactical. The screams that pierced the darkness were no longer just battle cries, but the sounds of men driven by hunger and despair. British patrols, pushing cautiously up the slopes, began to find positions abandoned not in orderly retreat, but in a state of eerie dissolution. Empty rice sacks, discarded packets of ammunition, and the silent, staring dead. The jungle itself seemed to be consuming the once invincible army. Then came the final, decisive weapon, not a tank nor a bullet, but a loudspeaker. Psychological warfare teams operating under the cover of darkness and mist set up their equipment facing the Japanese lines. Through the static and the dripping silence of the jungle dawn, a new sound would echo, the carefully curated strains of a Japanese folk song, a melancholy melody of home. It would play for a few minutes, a haunting, lonely sound in that alien place. Then a voice would follow, speaking clear, educated Japanese, not a shout, but a calm, factual statement. Soldiers of the 55th Division, you are cut off. Your comrades to the west are retreating. Your general cannot feed you. The British can. Walk towards the sound of this music with your hands raised. You will be given food, medicine, and kindness. You have fought with honor. Now live for your families. The first time it played, it was met with a barrage of rifle fire. The second time with defiant curses. But by the third day, as the folk song drifted through the mist, something changed. The return fire was sporadic, then ceased altogether. In the listening silence that followed, the sentries in the forward British trenches would see them, solitary figures, then small groups, emerging from the green wall like ghosts. They were emaciated, their uniforms hanging in rags, their eyes hollow with a fatigue deeper than sleep. They would walk slowly, deliberately towards the music, often leaving their rifles standing upright against a tree, a final symbolic surrender. For Brigadier Evans and his men, this was a victory more profound than any battlefield charge. They watched, not with triumph, but with a sober, almost pitying awe. The mockery was a distant memory. What they saw now was the human cost of a broken doctrine. The Japanese soldiers' supreme loyalty and willingness to endure had been exploited to the point of collapse. On February 24th, the link-up was official. Patrols of the 5th Indian Division, fighting eastward, met advance scouts from the admin box, pushing west. The siege was over. The box was relieved. But more importantly, the myth was shattered. The Battle of the Admin Box proved that a surrounded force, if supplied by air and armed with the will to fight, could not just survive, but become the pivot of a crushing counteroffensive. General Slim's Stand Fast order had rewritten the tactical playbook for the entire Burma campaign. As the bulldozers cleared the airstrip for more robust traffic and the walking wounded were finally evacuated, a final, telling image was captured. A group of Japanese prisoners, receiving their first proper meal from a British field kitchen, sat quietly on the ground. Across from them, parked at an angle, was a Lee tank of the 25th Dragoons, its crew performing maintenance. One of the prisoners, a young officer, slowly stopped eating. He simply stared at the tank, his eyes tracing the lines of its hull, the thickness of its armor, the bore of its gun. There was no hatred in his gaze, only a deep, weary comprehension. He was not looking at a machine. He was looking at the reason, the steel, industrial, undeniable reason why his world had ended. The laughter that had echoed in these hills was now a silence, broken only by the distant rumble of engines and the sure forward movement of an army that had learned to win.